Hey everyone, and welcome. So today we have a very special guest. I'm joined by Dr. Jerry Vlasak. Jerry has been an animal rights activist for over 30 years. He's been part of Sea Shepherd's campaigns against the Canadian seal hunt, the Shack campaign against Huntington Life Sciences, the long-running campaign against the fur industry, and more. He is also the co-founder of the North American Animal Liberation Press Office, which acts as a liaison between the general public and the actions of militant underground activists who take direct action for animal and earth liberation. So, thank you so much for joining us, Jerry.
My pleasure, Riddick.
Thank you. So, Jerry, to start off with, no hard feelings about the fact that I first heard of you from the Penn and Teller bullshit episode.
I remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Think that violence and nonviolence are not moral principles, they're tactics.
What? Sweet evil Jesus. What did he say? Ethical, my aching ass.
It's been quite a few years. I don't remember a whole lot about it, but I don't know. I mean, those guys are pretty funny, and I can take it as good as I can give it out. So I don't
Yeah.
really have any bad memories about it. Although, and I think one or both of them have become vegan since that
I was
time.
gonna say that
So
Penn Jillette is now a vegan, and he said one day he just stopped eating it and he just felt the suffering. And I feel like it's like that for so many of us.
right,
um,
right.
So on that note, what actually motivated you to become a vegan and become active in the animal liberation and animal rights movement?
Well, about 32 years ago or so, I was just given a couple of books to read by my then wife, and she asked me if I would read these books because it was something that she had stumbled upon. And so I read a book called Diet for a New America by John Robbins, who was the heir to the Baskin and Robbins fame.
Indeed.
And another book by a guy named Tom Reagan, a philosopher
Of
from
course.
North Carolina, who had written a book called The Case for Animal Rights. And so I read those two books, and it just resonated with me, and I just wondered why nobody had ever provided this information to me before. That was back in the days before the internet and everything, and so we didn't have quite the same access as people do today. But still, I mean, you would think that I was already a physician by then, and you would have thought that a lot of this stuff would have come up before, both uh, the issues around vivisection, but also the diet, around diet and if nothing else, just the fact that a plant-based diet is so much healthier for people to eat. And yeah, they didn't teach anything about that in medical school or subsequently during my surgical training at all. So I was really surprised. And when I read it, it was well footnoted and referenced, and it wasn't. I had every reason in the world to believe it. And I was amazed. And I said, well, I don't want any part in any of this anymore. So not only am I not going to participate in this program of killing and eating animals and at the same time doing myself a disservice for my own health, but I'll talk to my patients about it too. And so after that, I always did. So my patients would come to the hospital and I'd put them on a plant-based diet. And I would say, listen, just you can do whatever you want to do when you go home. But while you're here in the hospital, just like I'm not going to allow you to smoke cigarettes because I'm not going to allow you to eat an unhealthy diet either. So while you're here under my care, trying to get better from whatever is ailing you, we're going to pursue a healthy plan. And then if you go home, you can, I would give them out a bunch of literature about the benefits of a plant-based diet. And then I said, do whatever you want when you go home, but here's the information, and you can do with it. I've done with it what I've done, and you should do with it what I recommend. And so, yeah, that's how it all got started. I was still in private practice back in the early to mid '90s when all this happened. It was like
Yeah.
a light went on. As soon as the information was provided to me, I said, "Yeah, why didn't anybody ever point this out to me before?" Not that it was there, not that I shouldn't have figured it out on my own a lot earlier. I mean, I know kids that have figured it out all on their own when they're 12 or 13 years old,
Oh yeah.
but I didn't. And but once I was shown the fact, and once I knew about it, I couldn't go back and I couldn't keep participating in it. And then from there, it was just a matter of, well, what can I do to make things better? And different people approach me with different ways to get involved. And so I worked with all kind of different organizations, grassroots organizations, Friends of Animals, PETA. I came across Sea Shepherd after a while and got involved with Sea Shepherd, and um, and then we formed the press office, the North American Animal Liberation Press Office in 2004. after there was a break-in at a laboratory at the University of Iowa, and the media was looking around for somebody to comment on it. And we provided a press release and started talking about it, doing press releases and news media and that sort of thing to provide the other side of the story. So these weren't a bunch of vandals that were breaking into a building and just breaking stuff because they like to mess shit up. They were people with an ideology, and we felt like it was important to get that ideology out to the mainstream media and out to the general public. And so we started doing it. And Steve Best and I were the co-founders and started doing that in 2004. And I've been doing it ever since, or at least I have.
That's awesome. So you actually mentioned vivisection, and I know that that's actually a campaign that you have been heavily involved in. And I'm curious, you yourself actually at one point participated in animal experimentation against dogs, I think, if I read correctly. And I'm curious what your experience was with that.
At the time, I was a surgical resident, and I didn't have to do animal experimentation if I didn't want to. I was offered the chance to do it in order to basically pad my CV and write a bunch of papers and try to make my way in the academic world. So I did because they asked me to, and I did, and I didn't have any reason at the time. I didn't even think about what it meant.
Yeah.
And so I did this research for a year's time. I killed dogs along with the other people in the laboratory. I wrote a whole bunch of papers, gathered a whole bunch of data, wrote a whole bunch of papers. Looked really good on paper there when I finished my residency, but I didn't do anything that was going to make humans any better. It wasn't like I was
Right, right.
actually coming up with anything fantastic that was going to help people. Not that it would have been right anyway. I still, even if it had been something that would help people out, it still would have been wrong to do it to a
Hmm.
non-consenting being who feels pain and has an expectation of
Yeah.
life. But like everybody else, I just didn't think about it at the time. And later on, when I did start thinking about it, I realized that I had done a lot of research and gathered a lot of data, but just like everybody else, most of that data is always thrown away. Nothing ever comes of, I think I
Right.
read the statistic that 85% of all data gathered in animal laboratories is discarded and never even used to write a paper with, much
Hmm.
less done use anything that makes anything better for human beings. So it's an outdated, it's inefficient, and it's unethical.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So there's absolutely no reason for anybody to be doing experiments on animals at all. Period.
Exactly. It's like that quote from Peter Singer. Either the animal is not like us, in which case there's no reason for doing the experiment, or it's like us, in which case we shouldn't be doing the experiment in the first place. Right? So,
Right,
yeah.
and you can by picking which animal you want, you can get the results that you want to get in order to produce a paper or to support a
Right.
pharmaceutical product or anything else. So if what you're doing isn't supported when you experiment on mice, then try rats, and sometimes it'll work on them. And if it didn't work on rats, try it on rabbits. And if it doesn't work on rabbits, try it on something else. Eventually, you can get any result you want to get, depending on what animal you decide to experiment on and ultimately kill. So yeah, the whole thing is just it's fraught with irregularities, and it's inefficient. It's not a good way to figure out if you want to solve a scientific problem. There's a lot better ways to do it than to chop up an animal.
Yep. Absolutely. Since you got involved in the animal rights movement, would you say there's been a lot of progress in vivisection? Is it something that's dying out, or something that's still going strong?
Unfortunately, not. There have been some strides made. The NIH is, for instance, is starting to approve drugs that aren't tested on animals, for instance, because we have much better ways to do it. We have had
Yeah.
that for a long, long time, for 20 or 30 years at least. Um, but if you look at the numbers, there's still somewhere between 10 and 25 million animals being killed in the United States alone in
Right.
animal
Yeah.
laboratories. Even if you look at non-human primates, I mean, there are fewer chimpanzees and some of the higher animals, but if you look at just non-human primates as a total, there's nearly as many today as there were 15 or 20 years ago. I don't think
That's insane.
I don't think there's a lot that we can pat ourselves on the back for doing away with it.
Yeah.
Like I said, there have been some strides made, and it may be that it's starting to go in the right direction. But as of today, I would say nearly, if not the same, a number of animals are dying in laboratories as they were when I started.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you put a dent in it, and uh, that's all
Well,
the
there may
best
have
for
been
the
more. Yeah, there may have been
for the
more if
few. Exactly. Jerry, you've put yourself on the line many times for the animals, so you were even physically attacked by seal killers during your work with Sea Shepherd in Canada, right?
that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Sea Shepherd had been to the ice flows of Canada a number of times and done a lot of documenting of what was going on up there with the seal clovers. And they had taken some measures like trying to paint the seals with a henna dye, paint their coats so that they weren't
Oh, yeah.
the skins didn't have any value
Value, yeah.
to the people that were killing them. They tried a few other things, but the year that I went with them, I just decided I was going to stand between the seal killers and the seals, and they were going to have to get through me to kill the seals.
Hmm.
And so I got, there were a group of I don't know, maybe 15 or 20 of us that went out onto the ice floes and basically stood between where the seal killers were and where the seals were, and basically said, "Not today." And yeah, so then there was a confrontation, and we basically acted in a sort of Gandhian nonviolent action. We didn't really
Yeah.
fight back. We just sort of let the SEAL killers do what they were going to do. We documented it. We thought it would be useful. And then, of course, for our trouble, the RCMP flies in on helicopters and arrested most of us,
Wow.
even though we weren't the ones that were violating the law. Although we were violating the law that said it's against the law to uh, get within a half a nautical mile of a seal killer while he's killing a seal. So
Mm,
that was a charge that's what we were charged with. Nobody was ever charged for beating us up or hitting us with sticks or anything like that. No seals were killed that day, though. I must say. I mean,
that's awesome.
I mean, I'm sure they killed them the next day while I was in jail, but at least that day, nothing happened
Yeah.
to the.
And if I remember correctly, you actually re-entered Canada to serve your sentence in protest the next year.
Yeah, I think I was the only one of the. We were all convicted in absentia, by the way.
Yeah.
About a year later, or well, less than a year, about 6 months later, we were all convicted in absentia in the courts of violating that law about approaching within a certain distance of a seal killer while he's killing a seal. And I think the people that were arrested were from all over the world, and so there wasn't a lot of incentive for them to come back and face the charges.
Right.
And I think I was the only one, and I kind of just wanted to go and make a point out of it. So I went exactly a year later, while the seal killing was about to start again the following year. So I basically snuck into Canada because I was afraid they weren't going to let me into Canada because I
Yeah.
thought they might have tried to keep me out of Canada. But I actually snuck in on a bus into Canada and went down to the jail and turned myself in. And I said, here I am, lock me up. And they did. They locked me up for. We were all given a 30-day sentence, I think, and they locked me up for 20 days, and then they kicked me out after 20 days. Well, we also used it to get a lot of media. I mean, we did a press conference and kind of
Right.
got the stuff in the news without actually having to go out and get onto the ice floes again. So it
Yeah.
it was sort of a planned idea to get there and get some news media.
Are there any other intense moments you've ever faced in activism? Any highlights like that?
With Sea Shepherd, I mean, we were boarded by the Danish Navy off the coast of the Faroe Islands, where we were
Wow.
trying to stop the clubbing of pilot whales, which they would round up into these little harbors and then club them to death with crowbars, basically.
Mm, yeah.
So yeah, the Danish Navy came on board and threatened to take us all into custody. And Captain Watson said that if they did, that he would sink the ship right then and there in the ocean. And they backed up, and gave us all a certificate saying that we were banned from the Faroe Islands, and then went about their
Yeah.
business. But they trailed around behind us in a Danish warship for a few days, and we weren't quite sure what they were going to do. I've been roughed up in jail a few times. I mean, I don't think there's anything. I don't know. Nothing really has scared me so much. I always try to put myself in the place of the animals that are obviously undergoing a lot more fear and a lot more trauma than I am. And so when I do
Yeah.
that, it makes whatever I'm going through seem pretty minor.
So the mid 2000s were marked by a period of severe government repression against the animal and earth liberation movements in a period known as the Green Scare. What exactly happened during this time period to the animal rights movement, and how did it affect your activism?
It kind of got off to a start when a bunch of people were arrested in the northwest part of the country after there had been an active cells of the Earth Liberation Front, the Animal Liberation
Yep.
Front, that had been operating for quite a few years in the northwest. They had burned down a ski lodge in Vail, Colorado, that
Colorado,
was
yeah.
going to expand into lynx habitat. They had burned a horse corral in Oregon that was never rebuilt and never saw the death of horses again there. A whole bunch of different actions had
Yeah.
gone on
There was
in
Jeffrey
that part
Lures
of
with the SUVs, I think was part of it
Jeffrey
too.
Jeffrey Lures was one. Yeah, so there was a lot going on up there, and there was a the feds got a hold of some guy and on drug charges and said we're
Mm.
going to lock you up. We're going to lock you up in prison if you don't help us find out who these people were, because they knew he was involved in some of this, or they had reason to suspect that he was involved. And so they basically they said, unless you want to spend the next 20 years in jail and not see your children grow up and blah blah blah, wear a wire and go and get these people to talk about what they've done. And unwisely, they were willing to talk about it. And I mean, the rule is you never talk about anything.
Right, of
If you break
course.
the law, if you break the law and you get away with it, which most people do, you never talk about it again. You don't brag about it to your friends. You don't tell it to your family, and you don't talk to some, former comrade that shows up wearing a wire. Okay,
Yeah, yeah,
so
that's how
uh,
I watched that. I think that's how Daniel McGowan got it was Daniel McGowan, right? That
he was one of a bunch. There were actually
Oh, there were others? Okay.
there were a dozen or so people that were scooped up, and some of them then rolled over and became snitches, and
Mm,
then some of them held strong. And it turns out the ones that became snitches didn't get any lighter prison terms than the people who stayed strong. But bottom line is, during the early 2000s, a whole bunch of people were in the news and were getting arrested and were going to jail and so forth. And at the same time, there was kind of this government crackdown. There were hearings, and the U.S. Senate had hearings. The Department of uh, Health, Education, and Welfare held a series of conferences and meetings, and um, so yeah, there was a lot going on. The Animal Welfare Protection Act was upgraded to the Terrorism Act,
yeah.
where they added additional penalties for people who were found to be interfering with animal enterprise. There was the whole shack scenario where
I was yeah.
a lot of those people that were working on that campaign were arrested and sent to prison. So yeah, there was quite a bit of that going on about during those years. A lot of grand juries were convened at trying to get information on people. The spokespeople for the Earth Liberation Front, Craig Rosebraw and Leslie James Pickering, were called before grand juries
Mm.
8 or 10 times, I think, and refused to cooperate, and even went to jail for a while for refusing to cooperate with the grand juries. So a lot of that was going on about that time.
You testified to the Senate as part of this, right? Um,
So yeah, I went and testified. I was obviously the only one testifying on behalf of the animals. Everybody else was testifying about, how bad these people were and how much they were hurting the animal exploitation industry and how they needed to be shut down. And so I went up there and said, yeah, these people here's what they're doing and here's why they're doing it. And here's what they're doing to animals. And they all kind of booed me off the stage. And
Also, around this time, you came under fire from the press because of a few comments that you made that were claimed to endorsed violence against vivisectors. What are your views on that, and generally violence as a legitimate tactic in the animal rights movement?
well, I think every struggle for animal liberation has used force or violence in order to achieve their ends. So there's been no successful campaign for liberation, whether it was against apartheid in South Africa, whether it was against the French in Algeria, whether it was against the government in this country or with the civil rights movement. Uh, anywhere that there's been a successful struggle for liberation, there have been people that have been willing to use violence and force. And I don't think that it's necessarily unethical in every case. I'm not saying that it should be applied anywhere you happen to go along,
Right.
but I do think there is a time and place for it. And I think every nonviolent means should be exhausted first. I think
Yeah.
if someone is abusing an animal, you should ask them to stop. You should demand that they stop. You should try to pass a law to stop them. You should hold up a picket sign and tell people about what they're doing and try to get them to be stopped. I think you should go to their house late at night and scream and yell at their front door and tell them to stop. But if that doesn't work, then I think there's every ethical justification for physically stopping them from hurting animals if nothing else works. And these are
Mm.
basically the ideas that I espoused and that people weren't ready to hear. And they may not be ready to hear it today, but
It's gonna
that's the
be a
fact. The
while.
fact is, if someone was beating your dog with a 2x4 and you went up to the person and said, "Stop beating my dog with that 2x4," and if they didn't, then there happened to be another 2x4 laying there, I think most people would pick up a 2x4 and stop the guy from beating their dog to death with the 2x4. And I don't.
Absolutely. And
All I'm saying is that's form of self-defense, and I
it's
think
what Steve
using
Best has called
force.
extensional self-defense, right?
Exactly. I was actually going to use that. Extensional self-defense. You just like you would defend a child who couldn't defend
Yeah.
himself. We have every right to defend an animal who can't defend themselves, unless you're a speciesist and you don't think animals count nearly as much. And so we shouldn't be allowed to use force to defend an animal. We should be able to use force to defend a kindergartner or a child or a woman who couldn't defend herself against a much bigger man. That's okay. But why not animals too? If you feel like non-human animals are just as important as human animals, then we ought to be able to do that. And so
Yeah.
those have basically always been my comments. If you can't stop somebody from hurting or killing an animal any other way, then it's perfectly justified to use force to stop them. And I still believe that. I've said it on 60 Minutes, and I've said it in anybody that wanted to listen to it or anybody that's ever asked me about it.
Yeah. I watched your appearance on 60 Minutes with Rod Coronado. Was that an interesting day at the hospital at work the next day?
Dr. Jerry Vlasak, practicing trauma surgeon in Los Angeles, who also acts as a spokesperson for several extreme animal rights groups. Vlasak has told audiences that it's time to consider assassinating people who do research on animals.
I think people who torture innocent beings should be stopped. And if they won't stop when you ask them nicely, they won't stop when you demonstrate to them what they're doing is wrong, then they should be stopped using whatever means necessary.
Yeah, actually, I lost my job at the hospital after that
Sorry.
interview. I had been away for a couple of weeks, actually doing some hunt sabotage with Rod Coronado, and then
Oh,
we had
wow.
done, and the interview aired while we were actually doing the hunt sabotage, and we went to some bar somewhere out in the middle of nowhere and got them to turn it on their TV so we could watch it.
Yeah.
And then when I got back, the hospital had already called my wife because they didn't know where I was, and they'd called my wife and said, "Yeah, tell that guy not to show up for work next week." So yeah, I was unemployed for a better part of a year after
Wow.
that.
I really liked that interview, especially the part where you talked about companies torturing torturing and murdering millions of chickens, and the guy was like, "But people like chicken." That was some quality interviewing there. What does direct action look like nowadays, especially in such a high technology world? I mean, I'm sure, things have just changed so much since the Patriot Act, since, the Green Scare, as we just discussed it.
Actually, it really hadn't changed all that much. Most of the direct action that we see, unfortunately, lately, most of it's been in Europe. There hasn't been nearly as much illegal direct action in the United States as there used to be. And I don't know it's that so much people are afraid of the government because of the changes in the government since 9/11 and so forth, and the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act. And and so forth. I think people have just gotten a lot more comfortable. There's a lot more social media. People feel like they're being effective by going on social media and I don't know, signing petitions
Yeah.
and making TikTok videos. And I think there's a lot there's a lot of reasons I think why there's less direct action, illegal direct action going on. The vegan straight edge movement isn't nearly as strong now as it
Yeah.
used to be, and that's where I think a lot of the underground activists came out of the vegan straight edge movement.
Yeah. Walter Bond.
Yeah,
Five of
Walter
his seven.
Bond,
Five of his Shaq Seven were vegan straight edge from the scene.
yeah, Peter Young,
Peter Young. Oh yeah.
Other people that came out of that. So I think there's a lot of reasons. But on that said, there are still actions going on. Year before last, there were 3 different fur farm liberations, almost back to back here in the United States. The fur industry is on the ropes worldwide, and certainly in the United States, there's probably down from 300 to around 60 fur farms left in the country now. The price of fur pelts is right at break even, so there's no huge incentive to get into the fur industry anymore. More and more designers and retailers of fur products are renouncing fur, and we could talk about that. But there's been a huge campaign by Coalition to Abolish the Fur Trade to get rid of fur in the marketplace. So I think this illegal direct action in the form of targeting fur farmers and fur stores has been an important part of that campaign. It's not the only part, obviously. There's been legislation passed. It's against the law to sell fur in California now, for
Wow.
instance. That helps. All of that helps. But that was a huge monumental effort that took years and thousands of people hours and lots of effort and millions of dollars to get that done. Whereas, 1 or 2 people can go out in the middle of the night with, $100 worth of tools and liberate 1,000 mink from a fur farm and basically drive the fur farmer into financial ruin all at the same time.
Right.
And it takes almost nothing. If somebody wants to be the most effective that they can possibly be, there's no doubt in my mind that illegal direct action is the most bang for the buck.
Yeah.
You can get
I
more done in one night than
I 100% agree.
a campaign can get done in a month. Part of what we do at the press office is we go out there and let people know about illegal direct action. A lot of people that are your age and younger today don't even know about the Animal Liberation Front.
Yeah.
They kind of came of age after a lot of that stuff was going on, and so they don't even know what illegal direct action looks like or
None of
what
my
the Animal
vegan kids
Liberation
do.
Front does.
No.
So Joseph Budenberg, who's another
Yeah.
press officer with the press office, and a former animal liberator, and spent a couple of years in prison after eventually getting caught after raiding many mink farms. He and I, travel around the country talking to anybody that's willing to listen, including you, about illegal direct action and what it is and why it works and why it's effective and how anybody can do it that wants to. And so, yeah, that's one of the things we do at the press office. Obviously, we do receive anonymous communiques from people who break the law to help animals, and we publicize those communiques. We'll do interviews with the media if they're interested in the story. A lot of times they are. And we support people that get caught and spend time in prison, although that happens very, very rarely. The vast majority of people who break the law to help animals are never held accountable, never go to jail or prison. It's actually a fairly safe form of activism. I've been arrested a bunch of times, but never for that. Always for doing protests and things like that. So it's that's one of the things we do at the press office. So that's kind of what the press office does. We maintain a website and we do social media to let people know what's going on out there.
So Jerry, are there any current animal rights campaigns that are going on that people could get involved in?
I would encourage people to get involved in the AntiFur campaign that is being headed up by a group called the Coalition to Abolish the Fur Trade. And this group is utilizing the same type of tactics that were used against Huntington Life Sciences. In other words, it's a targeted campaign. It's very specific. They pick a target who is exploiting animals for their fur. They hone in on them with protest and letter writing and phone blockades and everything that they can, including going to the homes of people that are involved in management to encourage them to just issue a fur-free policy. Just say, listen, we won't design with fur anymore. And just this summer, there have been 3 successful targets. Max Mara, which is a large international luxury designer based in Paris. Marc Jacobs, who's a branch of the LVMH brand, the Louis Vuitton, Christian Dior brand. And most recently, Anne Fontaine, which is a smaller group that was company that was designing with fur. All 3 of those have issued fur-free policies after being targeted by the coalition to abolish the fur trade. In the last couple of years, a number of other companies like Neiman Marcus and Saks Fifth Avenue, for instance, have quit carrying fur when targeted by this organization. And probably, I don't know, at least a dozen other designers have quit using fur at the behest of this group. So I think it's a really worthwhile campaign. The fur industry is on the ropes; they're down. It's winnable. We can win this campaign, and if we can win the campaign against the use of fur, then we can move on to the next campaign and find out where that should be. And so I think it's important that if we all focus together on one winnable target, that's better than going off and doing a demo at Sequest one weekend and disrupting a whole food store for selling animal flesh another weekend and going against Kentucky Fried Chicken or something on another weekend or Burger King. Instead of spreading yourself all over the map, if we can all focus on one thing, and right now that thing is the fur trade, and the coalition to abolish the fur trade knows the tactics that work. There are
Yeah.
effective tactics that have been shown over and over and over to work, and they're utilizing those. So I would suggest that anybody that's interested in getting involved in grassroots animal activism get involved with them. I think the organization, I think it's CAFT, CAFT, USA.org is the website, and they're also, of course, on all forms of social media. So it's easy to get involved. There's people that are active in most cities around the country. So yeah, that's a great way to get involved. There's an organization called Animal Activism Mentorship, which puts on convergences all around the country. There's one coming up in Austin in October. These are convergences that pull together usually between 40, 50, 60 grassroots animal activists and concentrate on protesting a certain target that, again, usually involved with the fur trade. And it's a good way to learn how to be an activist. If you haven't done a lot of grassroots activism, their whole job is teaching people how to be effective activists. And so you can get involved with them online, Animal Activism Mentorship, or you can come to these convergences and get firsthand experience on how to be a good activist.
Yep. So as we were talking about just a little bit earlier, we're in troubled times. So, Captain Paul Watson, one of the most famous animal rights activists in the world, a practical celebrity, has been arrested and is under threat of being extradited to Japan. What can we in the movement do to support him?
The most important thing is to contact the Danish embassy and insist that they release him and not extradite him to Japan, where he's facing, I think, 14 years in prison or something, which at his age could be a life sentence. So I think that's the most important thing. There's a website, and you can write letters to him if you want to. But I think the Danish embassy's gotten hundreds and hundreds of emails and letters about him, and they're very aware of the issue. And I think the more support that we can throw behind Paul Watson, the better. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think, I don't know about the Danish because they're very passionate whalers. They're going to be with Japan on this cause. But at the same time, for, someone like I mentioned who is practically a celebrity such as him to be, for a Western country to extradite him to Japan, I think that would be insane. I
Well,
certainly
there's
hope
supposed to
that
be a
doesn't happen.
decision. Supposed to be a decision, I think, in the next week or so. So
Yeah,
hopefully we'll get good news about that.
absolutely. Um, awesome. Thanks so much for sharing that with us, Jerry. Um, Now we have a question from a viewer, Joseph Buddenberg, of course. What's your favorite vegan ice cream?
Oh, that's funny. I don't have a huge sweet tooth. I usually stick with the tried and proven Oatly brand from my local market. There's some great places where you can get vegan ice cream, but yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, I think vegan ice cream's done a whole lot better in the past few years. Like,
Area that we actually have made some progress in the dairy industry. The amount of dairy products that are sold today is about half what it was 20 years ago.
really, wow.
So that has been, and that's despite the government subsidies for the dairy industry. I mean, the government gives our tax money to the dairy industry to support them. Otherwise, they would have probably been out of business completely. But there's so many alternative products now that there's really no reason for anybody to still be participating in the dairy industry at all. It's not healthy for you. It's bad for kids. Even Dr. Spock in his well child care book that is kind of a Bible for parents talks about not giving your kids dairy products because it's harmful to their health. So there's no reason at all to drink anything made from dairy at all. So yeah, that's one place we've made a lot of progress. And
Yeah. So I think that just about covers everything. And I want to thank you so much for joining me, Jerry. It was really, really great talking to you. I think we learned a lot about your role in the animal rights movement and also just some great information on people who want to get involved in animal rights activism and how they can do that. So thank you so much for joining me.
yeah, thanks a lot, Riddick. I appreciate it. It was fun being here, and look forward to seeing what you put out.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right, ciao.
All right. All right. Thanks, man. See ya.